a young middle schooler, my mom putting me in the car in the middle of night saying, we're gonna go find your brother. And sometimes we found them in homeless shelters, sometimes we found them on the street. My brother came home one day and was like, yeah, they told me that I have schizophrenia. I went to my middle school library and I looked up what is schizophrenia because I had no idea what this was. I was the one to kind of help my mom go with him to different mental health resources. I didn't know what all of this meant, so even translating that to my mom was hard. The doctors were telling us one thing, but I had to formulate that in Spanish and kind of explain to my mom, especially something that I didn't really understand.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you again this week and bring you a great new episode with Priscilla Molina, a really impressive young woman. And I'm so proud of her because she is a young, new, diverse voice that is making an impact on our next generation and future generations. And one of the things I decided early on, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement, is that I want to start sharing my mic with diverse voices. So if you can think of anyone that you think I should highlight, please reach out to me at Right Now Rachel on any platform that's right with a W, and also follow me on any platform. And I just want to thank you so much for subscribing and writing those 5-star reviews. That's what helps me grow in this very busy podcasting universe. I do hope I'm touching your heart and making a difference. That's my goal, is to spread love and understanding and compassion. And on that note, thanks for listening and take care of yourself. Priscilla Molina is the voice of a new and diverse generation, someone we all need to pay attention to. Growing up, she frequently went to work with her parents, who immigrated from Guatemala, doing homework while her mom cleaned houses or her father fixed someone's leaky pipes. While some may have seen her parents as laborers, she saw leaders, inspiring her to lead her own community and help those in need. When Priscilla was in middle school, she became very interested in why her brother became homeless, was thinking about conspiracy theories, was very paranoid, and why he became violent towards himself. And then she learned he was schizophrenic, a term her family had never heard of. So at a very young age, it became her responsibility to accompany her parents to the psychiatrist to translate English for them. And it pushed Priscilla to mature early on and to become interested in the mental health field. Priscilla is the first generation in her family to go to college, and she's just graduated from UCLA with a Bachelor in Science in Psychobiology and a Minor's in Latin American Studies and Public Health. She's passionate about bridging the gaps between underserved communities and mental health resources. She's interested in health literacy tools to engage first-generation college students and adults on counseling in the Chicanx and Latinx communities. She's developed culturally sensitive training and has served as a translator for medical teams who provided aid abroad to Mexico, Cambodia, and other underserved countries. In her free time, Priscilla enjoys playing the piano at her church, shooting hoops with friends, and adventuring to new places with loved ones. Her desire to help others is infectious, and there is no doubt that her leadership skills will continue to make her community stronger and better. I'm so proud of Priscilla, and I know you will be too. Hi, Priscilla.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so happy you're here today. I first read about you through a UCLA profile, and the title was Thanks to Family, Graduating Senior is Driven to Bridge Cultural Gaps. It was regarding mental health awareness. And we spoke a few days ago and discussed how both of your parents are immigrants from Guatemala and how you're the first generation to go to college. And I have to tell you, I'm not exaggerating, I literally got choked up probably like 3 or 4 times. Tears came to my eyes and I felt so proud of you. I know I'm a mom, but I really was so proud of your drive and your compassion. And I also feel a little bit like kindred spirits. We're different generations, but we both grew up in the Valley and we both went to UCLA. On that note, welcome.
Thank you so much. I think that I really appreciate that because I think it's hard sometimes to kind of find value in my story and to kind of realize how large of an impact I can make by sharing it. One of my purposes that I have found in my life to really empower other people in what I can through sharing my story. So I also thank you for inviting me here to share a little bit.
Of course. And we need to hear more diverse voices. And I am so thrilled to get into yours. Now, I know that growing up, you frequently went to work with your parents and you would do your homework while your mom cleaned houses or your dad fixed someone's leaky pipes. While some may look at your parents as laborers, you really saw leaders. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how they led the community and how they helped those in need, because clearly they were wonderful mentors.
My parents were huge leaders. They both came to this country not knowing the language, experiencing different forms of discrimination, of not really, having resources that are not in their own language, not being able to connect and know different ways to navigate. Throughout my whole childhood, my mom, she started cleaning houses, right? Like you mentioned. And she's someone who, she put her foot in the door in whatever places she could. She's really great at networking. She has one job and then finds other jobs. And we go to a church since I was very little. And there was often new people, either family members or either other community members that immigrated from different countries. And they often needed work or needed places to start off. So what my mom did was she always offered to take them on and take them to the houses to help her clean and give them fair wages. I think that people don't realize this, but my mom, when she now files taxes, she's a business owner. She's people don't consider people who clean houses as they're just people who do this job that's kind of not regarded very highly. But my mom's a businesswoman, she's able to navigate all the income, navigate the workers that have come in and out of her business. So that's something that I really admired about my parents, not only seeing how she can navigate the business for herself, but also seeing if others are in need, how she can integrate that, because she had a similar experience of having the hardship of coming to this country with all these barriers. And then my dad too, he came first with, again, knowing nothing about plumbing, about anything. He worked at Jack in the Box for a little bit. He started working with my cousin and he knew nothing about plumbing. And then now over the years, he's become this sort of, because of his now, 20-something years within the plumbing profession, he's been able to, again, same thing, kind of advocate as new people come in. He's the one who teaches them plumbing. He's the one who teaches them how to assimilate, right? Or kind of find ways to feel like they have a place here in the U.S. coming from these different countries. So I feel like my dad's really intentional about that. And now he supervises the workers. He doesn't do as much as the more laborious work anymore, but he's able to teach and mentor these jobs that we often look past or kind of think of as kind of low. No, these people inspire people like me. My parents work so hard so that they always tell me, because we don't want you to have to work, wake up. My dad wakes up at 4 a.m., comes back 5, 6 p.m. So he always tells me, I don't want you to work this kind of job because I know that we weren't given the opportunity to use our brains, but you can.
Your parents they sound so inspirational. And I have to say, I'm sure your mom's business has been really disrupted with COVID. But one thing that I hope it's made clear is how important our essential workers are. I know that you really got inspired to become a mental health advocate or go into that field because of your older brother. His name is Erwin, right? Yes. Can you tell us a little bit about him and when you found out he was schizophrenic?
My brother, he is 9 years older than me. I don't have a lot of memories of him when I was very small because he was always a lot older than me. I remember my brother had a lot of issues in high school, and we never quite understood why he was really acting out in terms of, because he had always been a straight A student. He was involved in orchestra. Later in high school, he started getting involved with, we often describe it with the wrong crowd, being involved more with drugs, or one time he was also caught trying to steal thing. And I also want to acknowledge that these things a lot of times are associated with a lot of people from our community unjustly so. And I really want to acknowledge that that has a lot to do with like systemic issues that are kind of built up against people of color. And so we're seen as like, oh, these people are criminals, or like they're involved in all these bad things. But if we look at the system, like the system is built against us a lot of time. But I just wanted to acknowledge that my brother was affected by these things negatively. After he graduated high school, he started leaving the house a lot. And we didn't know where he was. And I just remember as a young middle schooler, my mom putting me in the car in the middle of the night saying, we're going to go find your brother. We're going to drive around the streets. And we would call places and we wouldn't know where he was. And sometimes we found him in homeless shelters. Sometimes we found him on the street. And after some time of that happening, which was really hard on us, my brother came home one day and was like, yeah, they told me that I have schizophrenia. And we were like, oh, okay, because we had no idea what that was. We didn't know what that meant. And I think I mentioned this to you. I remember I went to my middle school library and I looked up what is schizophrenia because I had no idea what this was. And then reading about it, I was like, oh, this is something that's pretty serious, but how can I help my brother? How can I help my family? Because it was pretty ongoing that he would leave the house and we wouldn't know where he was. And he was involved in different things that we never knew, like, was he okay and how to help him. So it started being when he stabilized a little bit, I was the one to kind of help my mom go with him to different mental health resources, either to see like a psychiatrist or a therapist, to get medication, what that looked like. I was always translating for my mom. I reflect back, I wasn't thinking this then, but I was a little girl, right? I didn't know like what all of this meant. So even translating that to my mom was hard. The doctors were telling us one thing, but I had to formulate that in Spanish and kind of explain to my mom, especially something that I didn't really understand. And then my mom has always been someone who's not a big fan of medication. And when you hear, oh, your son has a problem where medication can help, that was a huge barrier for my brother to receive that care, because my mom was like, no, like your brother's fine. Like your brother's not all these things and that the doctors are saying. And within our community, a lot of times it's looked at as like, oh, this person's crazy, because they do things that are strange, like they talk to themselves. My brother, it's very hard to hold the conversation with him because he goes off in weird tangents, and it's become something that I find comfort in, that I can talk to him still. But a lot of people are put off by that, don't want to talk to him or like kind of bully him because he's weird and he doesn't know how to hold the conversation, or he asks like inappropriate questions. My brother sometimes would go to the police station and like say certain things about like what was happening to him, that people were like trying to go after him or different things like that. And trying to navigate that was also hard.
It was a huge struggle for your mom to accept the medication, partly because of the stigma in the community. And also your mom is very Christian and founded in her faith. And she thought if he continued to pray, so she wasn't quite ready to look at it in more kind of medical terms. What really choked me up was imagining this young middle school girl trying so hard to research and figure out all the whys. Like, why did he become homeless? And why was he thinking about conspiracy theories? And why was he so paranoid? And why did he become violent towards himself? And why did he go to the police station? So, as a young girl, I can only imagine you trying to figure that out and then try to translate it from English to Spanish. So I also know, and I'm putting some words in your mouth, but we had spoken that your identity was formed as a person of color, and you were a Spanish speaker, and it was your responsibility to accompany, I'm guessing it was mostly your mom, to these psychiatrists or these mental health workers to translate. And you had to mature so early on. So can you just tell us about that?
When I talk about it, I don't get emotional, but then hearing it back, I'm like, whoa, like that's my reality, It was definitely hard. All adults go through their teenage years, so we all know that that's a very difficult time. I think it was such a huge, like you said, developing my identity. I was working really hard to do well in school because my parents put so much importance in this, and they saw that my brother was not going into that path anytime soon. So I felt a lot of pressure in that sense. I was doing well, so I knew that and I loved school. So that was always something that helped a little bit. I always felt that my achievements or something, I always felt like I could do more. And my parents always motivated me to do more. Sometimes I felt guilty because I want to help my brother more, but I don't have the knowledge, right? So it was frustrating that I was receiving this education, but I wasn't able to still help my brother. I wanted my family to be happy, I wanted my family to be okay. But then my brother always had something going on. And I feel like that always affected my mom's mental health and my own mental health as well. As a teenager, you feel like the attention sometimes is not always given on you. So it was frustrating that I was I want to do well and succeed, but then there's always this limitation of having to aid my brother and all these things. So at the time, I didn't see it as something that was really forming my identity or reinforcing the passions that I would have in the future. So I think that maturing aspect came quicker because I felt that, I have to know what to say. I have to know how to help people in crisis like my brother. I just want to also kind of put my voice into what you mentioned about my mom with her Christian values too. That's also another identity component, the way that she practices Christianity. And a lot of times the way she goes about it is saying we have to proclaim that your brother is not sick. In the beginning, she was no, medication's not the way to go. It's through prayer, through believing in God. And for me, it was hard because Christianity had always been a part of my identity, but I knew that there needed to be more steps to be done. I was no, Mom, we see that when my brother is taking medication, he's doing a lot better. So that was a whole identity crisis time too, kind of formulating, okay, I do have these Christian values too, but I'm also more knowledgeable about or can research more about mental health concerns. So how do I put these two things together? I feel like I had to be the one to kind of motivate my mom and motivate my family and educate my family. We can still hold these Christian values, but still seek the resources that my brother needs, that we need as a family.
Priscilla, I really appreciate you talking about the effects it had on you with your brother and how it also affected your mom's mental health, because partly why I'm doing what I'm doing, because mental health affects the entire family. I do not have bipolar, my mom does, and yet it affected me my entire life. I want to congratulate you because you just graduated, a few weeks ago, right?
Officially, June 14th, I finished.
June 14th. And you got a bachelor's in psychology and you minored in Latin American studies and public health. Very, very impressive. And I'm sure with COVID, it wasn't exactly the graduation you imagined, but I hope you took time to celebrate yourself because it's a huge accomplishment. And I know that you're taking the MCAT and you're prepping for med school applications to become a psychiatrist. I also know that you want to address the issues that you dealt with growing up so that underserved communities can have culturally sensitive care. I love that so much, but I don't know if my listeners understand that completely. So can you explain what culturally sensitive care means to underserved communities?
Before I go into that, I got my degree in psychobiology.
You're on your way to becoming a psychiatrist. Okay, thanks for correcting me.
When it comes to culture sensitivity, it's totally valid that people might not know much about this. It's something that is really important, but oftentimes not really integrated in our healthcare system, in our mental health resources. Oftentimes worse off for those that are not thought about when formulating these resources. And in a way, sometimes these resources are built in a very undiverse way, in saying that a lot of people, even within psychology, just in general, in all my studies, it was a lot of Caucasian white folks that kind of formulated these resources, these ideas. It makes sense that because they're the ones that are developing the resources, oftentimes it's going to be best for those communities too. So culture sensitivity comes in when you realize that, the people who are engaging in these resources are not all from this one community, whether it be they're white. It's a little bit more oftentimes privileged. So I think that cultural sensitivity comes in when you think about, okay, there's a lot of people of color here. What barriers, what stigma, what cultural backgrounds do they have that kind of limit them from really engaging fully in the resources and benefiting the most? If we're looking at it, this resource is a good fit for all, then that's when we see like disparities in healthcare. And that's where the component of equity comes in, right? Seeing where people are at and meeting them there, not just assuming, oh, this is going to work for everyone. A big example that I use that sometimes is a little bit more clear is coming with language, right? So if you have, for example, like with my family, right, we came in and we didn't know much about mental health. So that's a cultural barrier, right? And then the person who's speaking to us about it doesn't speak in the language that my family prefers. That already sets us back of really knowing more about what can best help, in my case, or my brother, or even us as a family. So then that's where like, okay, we need more mental health professionals who speak Spanish, who speak the different languages, or we need more translators, right? We need translators that are more aware about the cultural aspects of it. And that can really transform how people view the resources and how much people will reach out. Another component of cultural sensitivity is oftentimes there's this concept of like, oh, like poor these communities, like they're not doing as well on these things. Like, oh, we need to be the ones to save them, right? Like we need to be the ones to like implement our concepts of what mental health resources are so that they can be better. And that's oftentimes, it comes from a good intention, right? A lot of times people do come from a place of like, oh, we see these disparities, we want to help, but oftentimes that kind of does not correlate with being culturally sensitive. So that's where I always advocate for community leaders from that community. So like if you're someone who doesn't identify with the cultures that we see disparities in, it's going to be harder for you to take down your biases, take down your experiences, which are all part of who you are, and that's beautiful, right? But oftentimes we need to empower and put in the input of community leaders who know their community. So these people know like, okay, my community has these powerful parts of them and also these parts that maybe need more help. So now they're the ones that can inform what resources are best for that community.
Feel it in my bones. You are going to be a very powerful community leader. And we're going to talk more about some of the things you've done. And I also appreciate how you explained how a lot of doctors and mental health care professionals, they do come from high income and privilege. And it's hard to present resources to the Latinx community where, for example, depression and schizophrenia, they have stigma against it. Whereas maybe a white community might be talking about mental health issues in a different vein. So having somebody that looks like them come in is maybe less threatening. And so it's why we need more diverse doctors and leaders. And I had the privilege to go into Fairfax High School and speak to a group of parents who were Spanish speaking, and they had a translator. A lot of the questions began from the parents with, well, if God wants, or I've been praying. I 100% respect that and think prayer is so valuable and faith is so important. I was just thrilled to hear the next day that some of these parents came back to the school therapist to make an appointment because they realized, well, maybe there needs to be a little bit more than just going to church and praying. And again, I also appreciate the fact that I was a white woman coming in to talk to this community. It probably would have been much more powerful to have you go in and talk to this community.
I think a huge thing too is formulating an example like you gave with depression, right? With schizophrenia. A lot of times these terms are not known, but then we can't look down at these communities like, oh, these communities don't know about depression, or like they don't want to talk about these things, or like it's just a different way of doing so. Like a lot of times with depression, it can be translated to like, oh, I've been feeling really nervous, or like I'm not motivated, or these different symptoms that sometimes I just need to be connected together and aid this community. And a lot of times there's already so many huge things within the community, whether it be like family support within the church, within their faith, that is already making this community so resilient. So I think another huge component is not always focusing on what this community lacks, but also what this community is already rich in.
We should never just focus on the things they're lacking, that some of these communities are so rich in love and family and support, where other communities don't have that. So that is something to really celebrate and remember. We know that semantics really touch at the base of identities. I would love you to educate my listeners about the difference between Latinx, Chicanx, and Hispanic, and tell us which one you identify with.
A lot of people don't know about like the X part, and that's common throughout the three different ones that you just mentioned right now. So the X is used to kind of encapsulate within the Spanish language. There's a feminine and a masculine form of a lot of nouns that we use. So for example, like Latina is female and then Latino is male. So the X is used that no matter what gender you identify with, you can still call yourself like Latinx no matter what gender you are and still identify with the culture and the identity that comes behind it. So that's one factor, right? Like the X, like I can say like I'm Latina, right? Because I identify as a female. But then someone else who might not identify is non-binary, right? That doesn't identify with either. They might say like I'm Latinx. So Hispanic, if you look it up, it literally means that it's someone who has some origin from the Spanish, the history of Latin America, which is where this identity Latinx comes from. Our oppressors have always been the Spanish. So the Spanish are the ones who historically came, and it's often framed as like, oh, they conquered and like they're the ones who kind of made Latin America what they are today. But there was a lot of problematic killing of a lot of people, and we've always been oppressed.
Stealing their land.
Stealing the land that they rightfully have always been through and knew best. There was no collaboration. Anyways, that's a longer topic. But yeah, so that idea, we're trying to stray away from using Hispanic as often as we can because it kind of gives the power to the oppressor. It doesn't give value to all the other origins that we have. Latin America is such a beautiful mixture of so many what we have constructed as races, right? So whether it be like indigenous communities, yes, Spanish are involved, but there's also a lot of African descent through slavery, Asian, all type of races that we have constructed are really involved within Latin America. So kind of just pinpointing on the oppressor through using Hispanic has kind of been identified and tried to change that language. So that's where Latinx comes in, right? So Latinx is having that origin from Latin America. And that's something that's very highlighted. So that's what Latinx encapsulates, and that's what I identify with. So I say I'm from the Latinx community or I'm Latina. And even more so, sometimes I go into more detail, like you mentioned in the beginning, like I'm Guatemalan American, right? So I'm someone, my parents came from Guatemala and I was born here. So then I'm Guatemalan American. So yeah, Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx come from the Chicano movement in the 60s, fought for the rights of Mexican Americans. It was kind of really tied into also the African American civil rights movements, the Black civil rights movements that were happening in the 60s as well. They were very tied together. So it comes from that movement of kind of advocating for the rights of Mexican Americans through like farm workers and all these other ways that the Mexican American community was not being treated as equitable as other communities. So that's the Chicano part, right? Like, yeah, someone who is identifies as Chicanx, a lot of times it comes because their families were part of that movement, right? They were part of that Chicano movement, or simply they identify as Mexican American and identify with that movement, whether they were directly involved or not. So then they refer to themselves as Chicanx. So for example, for me, I am not Mexican American. My family's from Guatemala. So I don't identify as Chicanx, but I have a lot of friends who their family members stem from that movement, or simply they're also Mexican American. So they proudly say it. So it's a very proud, right? All of these words like Chicanx and Latinx especially are a form of pride of like our identity from these communities. If you go to my tías, my aunts and uncles in Guatemala, they'll be like, what? Latinx? I'm not Latinx.
They just think they're Guatemalan because they live in Guatemala. Yeah.
Right. In Mexico, you think that they would use Chicanx, but a lot of people in Mexico are not Mexican American, right? They don't have that experience within the US. So these terms really change within where you are. I think it's pretty beautiful to kind of get to know more about like the very diverse nature of Latin.
Well, if you're in Costa Rica, you feel differently than a Honduran or an El Salvadorian.
Hispanic, a lot of times is what we're more comfortable using because that's what's used on the census. That's what's used on to describe the Latinx community. And sometimes a lot of people from the Latinx community, like it's something they've heard their whole lives. So it's something like, oh, of course, like I'm Hispanic. So that's what they'll use. But I think, honestly, my knowledge about this comes from a really like privileged standpoint of going through my education here at UCLA and learning more about the sophistications of like what each term means. And that's why I'm able to like dissect like, oh, Hispanic, this is why Hispanic is kind of problematic to use. So I think it's more so like as a listener and like knowing this knowledge, it's when you gain that privilege of saying, oh, I know this now, so I'm going to try and use different language, you know?
Right. When you know better, you do better. I know that when you moved from your home to on campus, you feeling a little guilty about not being able to help your mom out with your brother. And you realized that you were beginning to feel a little bit of maybe sadness or beginning of depression. And you decided to reach out for mental health services on campus. And it was the first time you had ever been to therapy. I know that even still, there was a little bit of that stigma that you didn't even want to admit it yet to your mom. And you said, I'm going to see a counselor. And you just hoped she thought it was an academic counselor.
Yeah.
I want to know, how was going to therapy for the first time as a young adult?
A week before I went, a friend shared with me, she was like, yeah, I'm going to go. Our services are called CAPS, Counseling and Psychological Services. I didn't see much of the use of it or because I had never experienced it. But I got to a point that quarter, like you mentioned, right, those feelings of guilt, those feelings of I'm in such a privileged standpoint here at UCLA, yet my mother and my family are going through a lot of hardships still with my brother. Not only that, but like financial hardships, different things. And being here, not being able to directly help them oftentimes was very difficult. And I think it's a common experience within like the first generation college student experience. I went to CAPS for the first time. I remember as I walked in the door, I said, I'm fine. I have no idea why I'm here. Like, this is not for me. And then what CAPS does is they do like a 15-minute talking to you to kind of see where you're going to be best connected. And I remember I started talking and then like within like a minute, I was like bawling and I realized like, no, like I'm not okay right now. Like there's a lot of stuff that I don't know how to deal with. And I honestly didn't know how therapy was going to help. My therapist is so awesome. She's so great. Like I came with the intentionality, like if this is set to help people, and I'm someone who really promotes taking care of your mental health, then like I can't just let myself not take advantage of this. I would come into every session like, okay, what are like the main things on my head right now and that I want to share? And then I realized that therapy is really just, these people are professionals. They're trained to know like different skills and different ways to kind of promote behavior that is specific to the different emotional difficulties that you're going through. And I was like, how can I not go to this? Like after some sessions, I was like, she's really being intentional about like my personal experience and the skill sets that she knows that I can formulate. And it was a matter of like practicing them. And that was the first time I learned about like what it meant to be compassionate on myself and like how to get in tune with my values and how like when my values are not in tune, like how that disrupts my mental health. At CAPS here at UCLA, we don't have a lot of psychologists or any form of like mental health professionals that are people of color. So that kind of adds a barrier a lot of times for students because they feel like they have to explain their culture or like the discrimination or the different difficulties that we have experienced to someone that really doesn't know what that's like or knows it in a different way. So oftentimes that's discouraging. But for me, it kind of became a way to, when I described the different things I was going through culturally, I feel like it was helpful in a way to kind of also hear out what that meant for me. It was a really great experience for me, and I continue going to this day just to continue gaining the skill set. And I know that a lot of times I'm portrayed like my family members, my church community is very holds me up very high and like, oh, you know, you're our leader, you're the one that's going to progress. But I always advocate to like, you know, I have difficulties a lot of times, and I've been taught different coping mechanisms that maybe are not the best, but through like therapy, through different resources, I can gain those skills to be able to continue helping others when I'm able to help myself first. So that's something that I'm interested to continue doing, is sharing my story, sharing that experience, because I know a lot of people within my community that view mental health resources like therapy, like, no, like that's
well, and I first of all, you're so brave to come forward and talk about it at your age, but your vulnerability and your willingness to talk about it is what's going to help other people. I talk about this all the time on my podcast. I have shared some of the deepest, darkest family secrets in hopes that it encourages others to open up. And that's exactly what you're doing. And I also think it's really wonderful that through that therapy, you realized what is important and what's kind of missing and what you can work towards. So that's so great. I'm not just talking about personally, I'm talking about like on a general, like helping others. And I know that you became a resident assistant for 2 themed floors in UCLA residence halls. And I know that a lot of students would end up coming to you for mental health issues. And first of all, my first question is, what is a themed floor? I don't even know what that is. And what did you do to build community with those first generation college students?
The themed floor here at UCLA, it's really great that they have living learning communities. So we have floors here, floors meaning like an entire floor of like a building or a hall. People kind of sign up to be part of a floor that maybe it's a topic or a theme that they identify with or something they want to learn more about. So there's the identity-based ones, right? So we have the Chicanx, Latinx living learning community. Another identity one is like African diaspora, or we have Pacific Islander, or we have gender and sexuality, right? We have those floors that...
But do you find that just the floors end up only socializing with people that are within that community, or do they make an effort to mix?
Those different living learning communities, we have a lot of programming together. So
that's
kind
great.
of, you come in as a student, you have these identities that you feel more comfortable with. The first step is like making sure these students feel comfortable, right? They're seeing people who look like them, which they might not be able to see as much in their classes, or especially in the sciences. When it comes to the sciences, the number of people who are people of color like decrease very quickly as you go more in like upper divisions and stuff like that. So you're living in a place where, like, for example, I was in the Latinx floor 1 year where you hear people speaking Spanish. You have programming that has food from your culture. It's that first step of having that comfort. But then the second step is like, the importance of learning about other communities and kind of showing your own community to these diverse communities and coming together, right? Like coming together on projects, on what similarities do we have. So we had like programming with we call it the Filipinx floor. So a lot of them are either for the Philippines or different from the Pacific Islands. Just coming together and formulating, we have these similarities. Let's share this with the community to kind of show the beauty of our...
I love that.
Singular identities, but also as we come together, it can even be even more beautiful, right? We also have some like topic ones, like if you're interested in like sustainability or the arts.
Did you do anything specific to build the community with first generation?
So like I mentioned, right, in the Latinx floor, we have a lot of first gen students in that floor already. But then my second year, we did the first generation college students theme floor that I worked with. And it was always intentional programming where like you really empower these students. A lot of these students have not heard what it means to, I don't know if you know about like the imposter phenomenon, like always feeling like, maybe UCLA made a mistake for accepting me, because I don't see a lot of people who look like me or have like my experiences, and kind of acknowledging that and empowering them. Especially right now, it would be really important to have conversations about like, how does racism look in our community? How does like having intentional or food insecurity, how do we experience discrimination and how do we overcome that? Or how do we in ourselves have our own biases and stuff like that? So having conversations and programming about that. But I think to connect back to like the mental health aspect, I think something that what came to be to support these first gen students was a lot of one-on-one work, like checking in on them. And a lot of times they came in with a lot of mental health concerns because, there's a lot of identity crashes, a lot of like not knowing what to do. And like I mentioned, my own guilt that I felt coming into UCLA, a lot of those students felt the same way. So like you said, just sharing my story and like my understanding of what they're experiencing, but also listening to them and walking through with them. Like, UCLA doesn't only have CAPS. UCLA has a lot of other resources that can help. Let's make a plan. I'll check in with you next week to see like how maybe just going to the gym will help you, or like
also just sometimes these kids don't even know how to access the resources. Mm-hmm. So that is important too. Why don't you tell us about the podcast episode that you worked on regarding suicide with COVID in mind?
I was given the opportunity to join a seminar in one of my classes. We're going to create a podcast on a specific health issue, and given my interest in mental health, the issue that I chose was suicide. So I spoke to experts from across the field. Like I spoke to the director of our psychological services here at UCLA. I spoke to a professor at Harvard who works on research on suicide and firearms. Different people who really gave great insights. And something that I can share a little bit about what was said is that a lot of times it's more attractive to kind of jump to the conclusion like, oh, COVID-19 is going to cause, we see that gun rates are going up. We see that a lot of mental health issues are going up, and those need to be acknowledged and addressed. Oftentimes we think that must mean, right, that suicide rates are going to be going up. And a lot of what was mentioned was we won't know really until another year where this data will be collected. But something that was really advocated for with my guests were that it's a stepwise function to get to that stage of suicide or going through with suicide, pathway to that, right? So there's a stage where, yes, we're seeing a lot of increase in mental health issues that are coming up during this time. So it's how do we support these communities more intentionally, and what communities are being affected more? Psychiatrists mentioned that two communities are a lot more vulnerable right now are healthcare professionals, because they're at the front line seeing people come in at very high rates who are sick, who are dying, right, very quickly. Generally already at higher risk, but right now even more so. So simply like checking up if you have family members, friends who are healthcare workers, kind of thanking them can go a long way. As well as another community that was identified to be vulnerable is the elderly population, because they're the ones who have really high death rates right now with COVID. And so how can we still support them? Even if, they should be the ones that are more isolated.
And they're being isolated, which is so sad. Yeah.
So, if you have grandparents or, older folks, like, setting up a call every week, or, let's or if you do live with the elderly community, like being able to do stuff with them, watch movies every week, or have something that they can look forward to. We can really help kind of ease that next step from like having mental health concerns to reaching that, like maybe I do want to end my life. So yes, there's a lot of risks right now, increased risk to suicide, but it's a matter of taking action to be able to help. That comes with also making sure we're okay first. I always like to give the analogy like that our glass is filled so that it can overflow and then help others. Because if we're like half filled, then we're not going to be able to pour over to other spaces.
I will include it in the show notes so the listeners can listen to your podcast. Last two questions I ask all my guests. If you could write your younger self, so let's say you're 9 years old and you have just found out about Erwin's schizophrenia, and you're going to write yourself a love letter, knowing what you know now, what would you say?
Something that comes to mind immediately is like, you're not alone in this, and it's okay to not know all the answers. It's okay if you don't know how to translate something. It felt like it was never going to end, and really it hasn't. Like there's always been like ups and downs with my brother, and it's going to be continuous, but I think the love of our family and the love that I have with my mom, my parents, has really made us like resilient through all that, and also with our faith. Telling myself like, there's hope in all this, and although it's unfair and unjust that you're going through this, it's really going to provide you great insight to make a difference in the future. It's going to be hard, but take notes in your brain, because it's going to you're going to make a larger impact for a community that's very in need in the future.
I'm so proud of you because you are doing that. And I should have actually asked, how is Erwin doing now?
He's doing well. Right now he's receiving medication very regularly. He goes every month. Every so often he does leave the house still. And ever since the pandemic started, that's something that's a little nerve-wracking because we don't know where he goes. So his exposure can be to anyone. A little difficult for my mom sometimes. She's doing well. And then as soon as my brother leaves, she gets very upset. So we're still looking into options or resources to see if it's more consistent that my brother's leaving, then what other ways we can help him. Overall, he's doing well. He helped me. I moved into a new dorm right now, and that made him like help me do stuff. So it was nice. Yeah, it's good when I see him.
And that probably made him feel good that he can help you. Yeah. And schizophrenia is a tough disorder. It really is. So I wish you and your family lots of love and My last question is, what do you do that brings you happiness? Do you have any happiness habits?
I'm such a people person, so I love getting to know new people. So always my happy times are in whatever occasion. I'm sitting somewhere or I don't know, anywhere, and I'm like, hi, let me get to know you. We all come from such like diverse backgrounds, and the more we know about other people, I feel like the more we widen our perspective and the more we can really, make an impact in the personal work that we're doing. So I love that, which has been harder right now because, you're not going to just talk to anyone right now because you have to stay 6 feet away. But I try to still stay connected with my friends through calls and stuff like that. I love nature, so I love going on walks, even if it's just like around campus and looking at the flowers, the trees, honing in on that. Like the fact that, there's so much more to just my existence. Like, there's so much going on. If the world can continue like flourishing in some aspect, like I have a succulent. His name is Dave. and I look at him grow and I'm like, if my plant can grow, like I can continue going too. There's still hope. So that's a lot of happiness that comes with like just reflecting on nature and like calling my mom. That's always my mom. Just hearing her voice, I always tell her, just hearing her voice makes my day a lot better. So,
well, I have to tell the listeners, Priscilla and I are recording this via Zoom, and I'm seeing a very, very beautiful big smile. So it's lovely. Your mom's very lucky to have such a sweet, caring daughter. Well, this has been so great. I'm so grateful that we've had the chance to connect. And I know you're really going to inspire a lot of people. Keep doing what you're doing. You're amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I feel like this is another step for me to continue growing. So I thank you for the opportunity to do that. So I'm excited.
It's so my pleasure. It's so my pleasure. I hope to meet you soon. And I know you're going to do great things. I can tell, and just continue shining that big, happy, beautiful heart of yours to others. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.